This episode is brought to you by Generate Solutions, your go-to AI experts specializing in empowering commercial real estate companies and environmental consulting firms. As AI is quickly transforming industries and enhancing efficiency, it is important you don't let your business fall behind. At Generate Solutions, we streamline workflows and automate tasks by creating custom AI agents tailored specifically to your business needs. Interested in taking your operations to the next level with AI? Email mfiorante@generatesolutions.com or find us directly on LinkedIn by clicking the link in the bio. On to our episode.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with John Canana. Tonight it brings me another great pleasure to bring in an old friend who I met in the fall of 1975 at an all-boy Catholic school named Holy Cross High School. We sat in an algebra class together and we kind of hit it off. And Frank then, of course, had gone to another high school. We went our separate ways, but our families knew each other and we kept in touch. A very diversified young man, a mortgage leading veteran with over 35 years of experience in the Chicago market, including leadership positions across organization sales and team development. Spent many years with different companies and just a fantastic, very diversified gentleman. And of course, being involved at one time as a commissioner in Carroll Stream of the, I think it was the Park Districts, a member of the Columbian Club. I think his position still is the secretary or might be vice president now. And of course, we will get into his newly elected position in Campton Hills as the village trustee. It brings me great pleasure to bring in Frank Binetti. And Frank, what is going on with you, young man, before you answer all those questions?
Well, good evening, John, and thanks for having me. It's been quite a ride. You mentioned 1975, then you start thinking, boy, where did all the years go?
Right, right.
It's funny. A friend of mine, Peter Volpe, we graduated Bridge School in 75, and we're looking at our 50-year reunion. So we're planning kind of that. I think as you get older, you get a little nostalgic and you have social media nowadays where you can kind of stay in touch or get reacquainted with people from your past. And, so we're planning the 50-year reunion for grade school on the northwest side of Chicago. And,
Sure.
The Columbian Club keeps me busy. I just started a new position at First Community Mortgage. So that's been a good transition, staying busy with that. Columbian Club, always things going on with Columbian Club. So, very, very, very active. It's been a good ride and, you learn to appreciate things more as you get older. So,
Frank, well said. Without a doubt. And what's neat is you're keeping yourself busy. And I talk to so many people. I want to say 70% of the guys our age, or even women our age. And they're like, oh, can't wait to retire. Can't wait to retire. What are you going to do at home? I always say to myself, what are you going to do at home? And I can't see someone like you sitting at home, especially, you keep things in the flow, like you said, the Columbian thing. Now, of course, being the trustee here in Campton, which we're going to touch base on later on. You wind up going to college where after the...
I actually, back then I had to pay my own way through school. So I spent 2 years at Harper College in Palatine. And then I finished up at Northern Illinois University, to get my degrees, and then obviously started working after that. But it's always been local. I've always had to work. I think even as we got into high school, there's Laborio's Bakery on Grand Avenue there. I started there when I was 14 years old. I'd ride my bike from Harlem and Irving all the way to Laborio's on Grand. And, it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning in the summer months, and I'm riding my bike to go make bread. So, I've always worked hard, and, you kind of learn to appreciate, what good hard work and a work ethic will do for you. So.
Oh my God. And you know what? And again, too, you don't hear a story like that anymore. You just don't. I remember, even that last year at Holy Cross, stocking cans at a national food store till 2 in the morning, just to have a little bit of money. But again, you used a huge word here, the word work ethic, which I love. And of course, you had a great father who worked night and day too. And our upbringing is basically we're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
Were you always involved getting into the banking sector or mortgages right after the college years?
Well, you know what? After I graduated at NIU, I got into pharmaceutical sales. That was my first job, and it was nice. It was a nice, stable job. That would have been what, 1983. It was very stable. You had a company car, you had a salary that was halfway decent, but the upside of you know of what you can make financially was kind of limited. So what I was looking at is really something that would be more challenging, something that would be, that would drive me more. So I started in the mortgage business in 1987. So I did pharmaceuticals for a few years. And then I got into the mortgage business, which was 100% commission business at the time. So, it was basically risk reward. You take the risk, and if you did well at it, you got rewarded. And if you didn't do well, then you're back to finding a job somewhere else. So there was a lot of motivation there.
But did somebody say to you, "Hey, Frank, I think you could do this," or were you the one to say to yourself, "I want to give a crack at this"? Because now mortgages involves math and numbers. Were you good with the numbers?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask that because two of my least liked subjects, not that I was bad at them, but I didn't like them as much as some of the other stuff. But one was science. So when I got out of college, I started selling pharmaceuticals, which was based in science. And I never really enjoyed math. And then I got into the mortgage business, which was all finance and numbers. So it's kind of funny. So I would say I did not get into either one of those fields because I like the subject matter. I think the pharmaceutical sales was just an opportunity coming out of college that I interviewed with. And then the mortgage business was my father-in-law, quite honestly.
Really?
We were actually building a house. We were living in Schaumburg at the time, and we were building a house in Carroll Stream. So we moved back in with my in-laws just as the house was being built because our house in Schaumburg had sold already. And he would keep telling me about the mortgage business and how it worked and the amount of money that could be made in
Right.
the business, and it just intrigued me to the point where I finally said, you know what, I'm going to go try it. I've got to um, I've got to give it a shot. If you can't do it when you're young, when are you going to do it? So I threw away the nice stable job with the company car and everything else, and I decided to take a shot. And it happened at a very good time. It was 1987. I don't know if you remember, but back in the early 80s, interest rates were, 18,
Oh yeah.
19, 20%. So they had just started coming down. I want to say they were like in the 14, 15% range. So people started to refinance and do some things. So
Sure.
timing wise, it was actually a good move. But 1987 also saw Black Monday in October. So I got a whole bunch of momentum early in the year, and then everything kind of stopped. I forget which Monday in October it was, but they called it Black Monday, and
I
everything
want to
just
say
kind
it
of
was that
stopped.
first week thing because we went into '88, kind of into the tailspin, right?
Right, right. So then I'm like, uh-oh, now what happens? So, I didn't know any better. There were so many people that were in the banking business back then, and they were just used to just sitting around in banks and not really going out and selling and trying to drum up business and get referrals. I didn't know any better. I had just started in March. I had my wife and we had the house, and I needed to find a way to make money. So I just got in my
Sure.
car and I started driving around calling on realtors and asking them for business. And fortunately, not a lot of loan officers back then knew how to do that. They just basically sat around in banks and waited for people to come to them. So it was kind of unique even for the realtors to kind of see loan officers at the time. And I had some really good sales training coming out of pharmaceutical sales because they put you through some really solid sales courses. And, so it was just, timing was good. I was motivated. The market was good, and things just took off from there. So
Frank, just listening to you, because and I have to really zero in on some of this stuff. You basically were doing something that was innovative for the time, because, like you said, a lot. I remember my dad, because the Italian community would come to him to buy a ticket, do an income tax. And they say, "Hey, Ben, so we're going to buy a house. Do you know a loan officer, or do you know anybody at Craig and Federal? We'll use an old name, or
Yeah,
St. Paul."
yeah,
And my dad
yeah,
would go in and he goes, "This is Frank Binetti. He's got 50,000 in the bank," and there was a handshake agreement.
yep.
you know but
And
now
it's
you take it to a different step.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. If you think back in the 80s, I hate to bring this movie up because it doesn't cast the bright lights on the mortgage business. It actually casts a pretty dark light. But there was the movie The Big Short. In 2008, when everything collapsed, they started writing books and doing movies called The Big Short. And then I started to realize that the entire current mortgage industry started to be built right around 1985, 1984, 1985-ish. So I was there right at the beginning. So as I'm watching this movie and as I'm reading, the books about the mortgage industry and how it evolved, I'm sitting there going, holy cow, I was right there at the beginning of when it really transitioned from really a banking type world to a securities type world, where things were actually being traded and sold, versus banks just kind of holding mortgages on their books and stuff. So yeah, it was the very beginning, and it became very challenging for a lot of people back then because, like I said, they loved the security of being in a bank, and they didn't really understand how to go out and have a conversation with a realtor and build some trust and loyalty to where they felt confident to refer their customers to you. Because if you think about it, realtors are 100% commission too, right? So if
Right.
they're going to refer you, it's got to be somebody they can trust. That,
Sure.
the way I always looked at it, the realtor would hand you their paycheck, on the day they referred you somebody, and they look at you and say, "Hey, I need this back on the day of closing." So, that's the way I always looked at it is, hey, they're trusting you with their money, they're trusting you with their livelihood. You got to do a good job for them and get them to the closing table.
You start out, you probably thought, okay, when you started out, there wasn't this Black Monday. And then when that came, now you're like, okay, you're probably saying, okay, again, like you had said, you got to change careers here again or something if this doesn't open up. But
Yeah.
when that changed and things went back to the normality, did you feel now a confidence that you got through the bad weather? Now were you ready to rock and roll a little bit?
Yeah, you know what, John? It's funny. You get older, you get smarter. At least that's what they say. But sometimes it's good to be young and stupid because I didn't really totally understand what Black Monday meant and what the impact was going to be on the industry and the financial
Sure.
markets. I mean, you heard the news, you heard the stories, but I was like, look, I got bills to pay, I got a mortgage to pay. I'm going to just go out and try to find business. And I I think I made that commitment from day one. Fortunately, my wife understood because it was her dad who's the one who kind of talked me, or gave me the background to get in the
Right.
business. So she understood it. She lived it her entire life because he sold real estate before he got in the mortgage business. So she got it. So she was very supportive, and God bless her at the time. And I was fortunate. I actually started getting business right away from realtors, and it didn't really take too long because, like I said, most of the loan officers weren't going out and making sales calls back then. So I was fortunate. I built my business. The funny part is I worked from March until the end of the year, and trying to learn the mortgage business takes a lot of time, and I was learning on the fly. And keep in mind, I was writing 5 or 6 loans a day. I was processing my own loans when I first started. That's how I learned the business. So I'd literally get to the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, take loan applications all day, and I'd get home about 1 in the morning, because I was
Jeez.
doing all the paperwork and all the processing. But I learned so much so fast. Um, I built up so much momentum back then, and it was all well worth it. I mean, I put in hours and hours, but by the end of that year, I finished number 3 in the company, and I started in March, so basically in 9 months, and probably really 7 months of selling. Yeah, it was almost like a natural thing for me. It just I hit it at the right time, and I had the blue collar work ethic in a white collar
Right.
job, and it really paid off. So
Frank, was with LaSalle. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, when I first started in '87, it was actually Tallman Home Federal, and then eventually they
Tallman
got
Home.
bought
Wow,
out.
you brought that name back from the past.
Yeah, it's funny because we grew up right around Harlem and Irving, and
Yeah,
Tallman
we
Home
were there.
Federal is where we
Yeah.
used to bank. When I was a kid, my mom would bank there, and we'd be there
And
all the time.
Tallman
And
Home, Frank, was the old Unity Savings.
yep, yep, it was Unity Savings back then. That's correct. So
Yeah, I remember there was a president there named Bass, the president of that bank. And but yeah, I remember when it became Tallman. Of course, one of the first changes in the industry. Now, of course, banks go from banks to banks. MB became Fifth Third. I don't have to tell you about banking and
right.
all the changes. But you know what's great about this, and really, this is really neat to who's ever going to be watching our interview in the coming days. Your rapport on the street and going out to, let's say, to the real estate market, and of course, if things went well, like they have with you, because I mean, your reputation speaks for itself. If things went well, that was your referral, because that guy's going to say, oh my God, Benetti from
Absolutely.
LaSalle did this for me, did that for me, put in the extra effort, and now the next realtor finds out about you, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And next realtor, family members, it just the referrals that you get are incredible, but you have to build your business the right way. And I'll be honest with you, if we had the technology back then than we have
Oh,
today, where everything's automated, and you can stay in touch with people and build your database, I'd probably still be originating loans because, the volume of business you could do and the trust that you could build over 37 years in the business would be amazing. But it was we were starting to have kids back then. We ended up with four
sure.
kids, so I needed to try to get a little bit of stability. So I went the management route. But like I said, it's all worked out. I thank God every day, for the blessing that I had to be in this business. So
What a great career to have that, and that, you had a vision in the sense of, everybody's got this way of doing things, but you had your own style with this, and it
yeah.
worked for you. How
Yeah.
long after LaSalle? Now, after LaSalle, do you go on your own pretty much?
No, no. Honestly, I've always worked for banks.
Mm.
For a small stretch, I went to work for an independent, but I worked for LaSalle for almost 18 years.
Yes.
Then, then I left and I got recruited away to go to Countrywide, and I worked there. I actually had a 2-year deal with them that I walked out on after 14 months because I kind of saw the implosion coming
Oh,
with Countrywide. I mean, I know, once Bank of America took them over and everything was kind of going crazy. And, back then I told my wife, I said, you know what, the money's good, what they guaranteed me and everything here, but, I'll be honest with you, I got to get out of here. The way they do business just isn't the right way. My reputation is worth more than anything they could pay. So I literally walked out after 14 months on a 2-year guarantee, and I just couldn't do it. I mean, ethically, they just weren't doing the business the way I thought it should be done. So I moved on from there. But for the most part, I've worked at banks. I've enjoyed it. I like the stability of a bank, and that helps quite a bit. And in all
sure,
honesty, if I'd have gone on my own, I know a lot of friends that were in the business.
sure.
That had their own business in 2008 when everything collapsed and they lost everything. So in a way,
Yeah.
again, I might have made a lot more money prior to that, but if you're going to lose it all, then it's not worth it. I've always been a little bit more on the conservative side when it comes to that.
Keen on you to see explosion coming, but it came from your experience and how you worked.
Yeah.
Okay. I know you worked for the banks, but you had a style, and it's a
Yeah.
style that
Well,
you wanted to
you
keep.
know what, John, I've always believed in fundamentals. I think when we were kids growing up, we all played sports, right?
Yes.
You played baseball. I know you're a big hockey guy. We played soccer. You played everything else. And just like anything in life, you have to have certain fundamentals that you have to follow. If you want to be a good baseball player, you have to have good fundamentals on how to throw, on how to swing, how to catch a ball. Same thing with hockey, how to take a shot, how to block a shot, all that kind of stuff. So, life has certain fundamentals too, right? And you have to live your life by those fundamentals. And I've always believed in that, and I've always tried to do business that way. So,
major changes in this industry. And I know now from LaSalle, I know you went on the countrywide. After that, I think you went on to inland. Matter of fact, you helped my son and myself a few times. Um, did you were the changes rampant when we hit the 2000 era?
Yeah, it's you know what, things were going crazy prior to the meltdown. We just finished talking about fundamentals, and what happened was the industry got outside the fundamentals. It you used to have good credit. You had to have capital. They called it the five C's back then, and we got totally away from that. I mean, we were doing loans, for people who would walk in and say, "Hey, I made $100,000 last year," and you find out that they were a janitor, at a school, and it's like, there's no way this person made $100,000, but they had stated income, stated assets, and that started coming in probably the mid 2000s. It was a lot of subprime
Sure.
type lending, which it's lending people with no money, not enough income, their credit wasn't that great, so literally all the fundamentals went out the window. And the really weird part is, as busy as we were back then, I said, you know what, I don't understand how we can be doing business in this environment, because it doesn't make any sense. And sure enough, 2008 came and everything collapsed. The Great Recession happened, and again, I can't emphasize enough that fundamentally you got to keep things in place, and fundamentally you got to follow the same steps if you want anything to go well. And we got so far outside the fundamentals in the mid 2000s that it caused an entire economy almost to collapse. So
Frank, now, of course, within, and correct me here, instantly, they could find out what a John Canana is making, what a John Canana owes correctly in life. I mean, they'll, okay, you got this, you got this, you got
sure.
this. And you got a $3,000 mortgage, and you're only bringing in this. This reminds me of my father, who was basically an accountant, and he would go and do a pizza guy's thing, and the guy was making cash, and he would
Yeah.
tell my dad he's only making 5,000, and my dad says, "Well, why are you driving an $11,000 Fleetwood?"
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know what, and God bless them. Look, if you're self-employed and you could save yourself on taxes, that's awesome. But you can't turn around then and say, "Hey, can you lend me, $250,000 to go buy a house, or $300,000 to buy a house?" You got to be able to show that you can afford to make the payment. Um, and there's a lot of people that live their lives on credit. You know, uh, you know, they live like a king, but basically, earn like a pauper. So it's
Yeah,
not a
right.
good combination.
Peter to pay Paul, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That happens a lot.
When did you see a consistency with this in your career where now you became basically, hey, John Canana, you can't afford this, or John Canana, you can get this. I mean, you're basically a guy now that really had to zoom in on the client, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the funny part is, I became a manager fairly quick. Like I said before, my first year, I finished number three in the company. So, within about 3 years, I got into management. And back then, they didn't really let you originate and manage at the same time. So I had to make a
Okay.
career choice. That's, we were having kids back then, and I thought the management route was a better route. So, you had a small base salary, but you got paid commissions on other people's business. So as you hired and recruited loan officers and trained them and let them go out and get business, that's how we made money. But to me, I always loved the relationship part of the business. And back then, if you think back in the early 90s, there was a lot of new construction going on in Chicago. There was a lot of the regional builders. I got to know quite a few of them, and we did quite a bit of business at LaSalle. The Cambridge Homes, the Town and Countries, the Lexingtons. We were fortunate enough to have the relationships with a lot of the builders and a lot of their salespeople, to where we did a decent amount of business. When I managed our Naperville office for LaSalle, we were doing 85% of our business was all new construction back then. So,
Wow.
and it
You
is
know,
funny nowadays. You drive around to all the neighborhoods and subdivisions that were being built back then, and you're like, oh yeah, I did a loan on that house, I did a loan on that house.
And
It's kind of funny.
look back. Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, and 30 years later, 35 years later, you're driving around going, holy cow, look how that neighborhood matured.
Wow.
Yeah,
Um, that when you're bringing up now, and I'm trying to get a handle on this because of some people that are in real estate, and of course, knowing somebody like you, during the COVID era, which became a really tough era for me, because if my father didn't own that building, Venus Travel's a thing of the past. Because
yeah,
there's no way I could have made it. There's no way
yeah.
I could
You
have made
went
it.
along. Absolutely, yeah. There was a
Right.
lot.
So now, what is the biggest problem when we say, I hear realtors always saying to me, John, there's no inventory. John, there's no inventory. John,
Yeah.
there's no inventory. Is it because the loans they gave out just before COVID or during COVID?
Yeah, it was actually just before and during and shortly after. Interest rates were in the high twos, 3%. So if you think about it, if you're sitting on a 3% mortgage, there's really not a lot of incentive to go sell your house and go buy another house at 7%, right?
Right.
So people weren't selling their houses, they're not refinancing their houses because interest rates are so much higher than they used to be. So, and what was happening is the people who were retiring and looking to downsize, and the young people looking to get into the housing market were all looking for the same size house. They were all looking for that house in the $300,000 to $400,000 range, because the people who had the McMansions didn't want to live in the McMansions anymore because they were empty nesters, so they're looking for that smaller home. So what was happening is everybody was looking for the same house and nobody wanted the bigger houses,
Got it.
and so there was lack of demand and there was lack of incentive, because if you're sitting in a bigger house and you sell it and you give up your 3% rate and you get say even a half the loan that you had before, but at double the interest rate, you're making basically the same payment for a much smaller house. So everybody's sitting there going, well, I might as well stay in my house until things
Sure.
get right sized. What added to that was all those regional builders that I mentioned before back in the 90s. 2008 made them all disappear. So, all we have nowadays is a bunch of smaller builders who do a lot of renovation and rehab type work. And then you got the big national builders who, are building subdivisions, but they don't necessarily like to come to Illinois because Illinois, from a tax basis and it's not really builder friendly, even though they're some are doing here, but that mid-sized builder, that regional builder that really
Sure.
drove the Chicago market and the suburbs back in the 90s all disappeared. They're gone. There's a couple that survived, but there's just not enough builders. And then add to that the lack of workforce, right? The carpenters, the high schools, I don't even know when it happened, but got rid of all the trade programs. You used to
Got
be
it.
able to go to school, and if college wasn't your route, you used to be able to go to school and take woodworking or
Right.
electrical or whatever. That all disappeared. So you had no laborers, to get the housing built. So the combination of the Great Recession, the lack of labor, the interest rate environment, all of a sudden we went 10 years without really building a lot of houses, and the demand, the population kept growing, but the amount of houses didn't keep growing. So we just ended up in a really really bad spot. So
I have to tell you, you didn't even know that question was coming here tonight. And I want to tell our audience that none of this was pre planned with Frank. This is a free flowing conversation. Just listening to you, you knew that this was coming. I mean,
yeah,
you were going, well, let me see. You talked about this like you knew it was coming, this is why I think this is why you're such a great industry leader in this. Did you have a feeling that this, oh boy, this is going to collapse on us?
yeah, that's why I said before. I mean, I saw the fundamentals being out of whack prior to '08, and I'm just sitting there going, I just don't understand how we can keep doing this, because eventually, somebody who says they're making one thing but they're actually making less, if they can't afford to make the payments, it's going to catch up to them at some point. And if you
Right.
don't have any money, if you don't have any reserves in the bank, and you're living paycheck to paycheck, you get into a car accident or you don't have a
Okay.
car to get to work anymore. A family member gets sick.
Sure.
Something happens to your house, a furnace goes out or whatever, all of a sudden you're late on your payments. And that's what was happening in '08. People were way overbuying. The industry was letting them get loans. Fortunately, I
Sure.
worked at some places we didn't really do a lot of subprime, thank goodness. But some places really, really got hurt to the point where those lenders just disappeared and never came back into the industry. Thank goodness, because they were doing business, wrong kind of business. But you get hurt if you're not doing things the right way.
The right way, it comes back to that main word you used here tonight, fundamentals.
Yeah.
Where we're at right now, let's say I'll say when did it end? Okay, when COVID ended at 22 to now, do you see us on the right track? Does Frank Binetti see this mortgage thing going on the right track?
Yeah, I think it will eventually, but we need interest rates to really come back down a little bit. Here's what's happening. In the industry over the years, this is what's always happened. People run up their credit cards, and then all of a sudden they start making crazy credit card payments every month because the interest rates are so much higher. Then they take out an equity loan on their house, they pay off all their credit cards, and then once they max that out and the credit cards start running up again, they do a cash out refinance to pay everything off. And people unfortunately just don't have the discipline to manage their money, and some of them have just never really been taught. We had parents or that didn't come from a lot of money, right?
No.
So that they had to be very frugal in how they lived their lives. And not everybody lives that way, so they get themselves in trouble and going. So to me, if interest rates don't dip down into either the high fives or low sixes, I think we're going to be stuck in this for a while. And you're going to see people in trouble. The amount of credit card debt that's out there is at historic
Okay.
highs right now. Um, People are using their credit cards more today than they ever have in history. So you're going to see people in trouble, and we're going to have to see interest rates come down. And if interest rates come down, people are going to start selling their houses. There's going to be more inventory. So we are seeing some positive signs from that aspect. Not so much in the Chicago area, but around the country, you're seeing houses come on the market at a much faster
Sure.
pace than they were before. So I think we are coming out of it, but we're going to need some relief on interest rates. I think we're going to get there. It's just not happening very fast. So
It's not going to happen like say in the next 2 or 3 months, maybe
no,
by the
no,
end of the
I
year.
think end of the year, early next
Right.
year, you might see the log jam, loosen up a little bit.
But Frank, again, great on the patterns of what people do. Okay, next month they'll be better, and that next month never comes, then they refinance. I mean, you hit it spot on because
Yeah.
that's all people talk about, right? And they
Yeah,
go
we call
back
we
to
call it kicking a can. You don't want to deal
okay,
with it today, so you kick the can down the
sure.
road, and you hope. Hope isn't a good game plan. So
And I got to tell you, you bring up your parents, you bring up my parents. They weren't going out to eat every week. They
no,
weren't, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I remember eating pasta some nights 4 or 6 times a month, not just on Sunday. you know,
sure,
because, I remember forget, I lost a pair of goalie gloves once, and my dad told my mom, you know how many income taxes I got to do to buy him goalie gloves,
yeah,
and he thinks he can
yeah,
just lose them.
yeah,
Anyway, I want to kind of switch gears here, and I really thank you for this mortgage lesson you gave us tonight because it was really interesting, and I meant that because what's going on now and what I hear every day and how you started this, just fantastic. And of course, history repeats itself, and if you don't respect those things of history,
yeah.
it comes back to bite you here. We're going to stop it here just for a few seconds. I'm visiting tonight with Frank Binetti, a mortgage lending veteran with over 35 years of experience in the Chicago market, including the leadership positions that Frank has mentioned here tonight, organizational sales, and team development. Not only has Frank been in the mortgage industry, Frank at one time was a Carroll Stream, a park commissioner here in Carroll Stream, Illinois. Frank is a member of the Columbian Club, a very, very dignified club that's been around for years. Frank, what is the title now at the Columbian Club?
I am the secretary this year, so next year I'll
Okay.
be one of the vice presidents. So
Yeah, that's what I had heard the rumblings that
yeah.
about the vice president. But again, here in April, Frank pulled off a victory as a trustee at Campton Hills. And Frank, I want to kind of elaborate on this Campton Hills because congratulations to you. I knew you were running. I didn't follow up to see if you won. I didn't Google it, but but how? Congratulations! This had to be you had to be honored to get this position.
Yeah, it was, and the funny part is the way it even came about was I was park commissioner in Carroll Stream, back in the '90s when we lived there, '90s and early 2000s. The parks weren't really of the standard that the residents liked. Carroll Stream grew from basically a farm town to it went crazy and it exploded back in the '90s with so much development, but the parks didn't keep up with it. So I ran for park commissioner, ended up winning. I ended up being president for 2 years. We actually won the National Gold Medal Award for from the Parks and Recreation, National Parks and Recreations, just because of some of the positive stuff that we did. And one of the people that worked at Carroll Stream at the time happened to be the city clerk in Campton Hills, and they were looking for a candidate. And she called me and she said, "Hey Frank, I remember you from Carroll Stream. You did such a good job there. I like the way you handled yourself and everything." She said, "Would you mind or consider running for office here locally?" And Campton Hills has always had a very contentious, for a small town anyway, very
Sure.
contentious political environment. So I'm like, look, I don't want to get into the middle of a fight. I've lived here for 20 years. I've kept to myself. My kids were all older when we moved here. I just really was enjoying living out here in the peace and quiet. She goes, "Oh, no, 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 it won't be like that." Well, sure enough, you get into the campaign and, the mud starts flying and everything. So,
Of course,
so
so
I was fortunate enough to have a good campaign manager here. She was very knowledgeable about politics and everything, and she really put us in a good position. And and the funny part is a lot of people, they get into politics because in certain ways they have a way to personally gain something, or they have a personal agenda, that they
sure.
want to get fixed. Me, I didn't have anything. I didn't have a personal agenda. I had nothing to gain. It just, as you get older, you want to start giving things back. So I figure, hey, I'm going to
Exactly.
donate my time and try to help the community. There's challenges in Campton Hills as far as the roads. It's a very small budget. So, we became a village to try to stop other towns from annexing around us and
Around
really
you.
getting overpopulated. But because of the way we built the town back in 2007, or the way they built it, there just wasn't a big enough budget to handle road maintenance and everything else. So I'm like, you know what? Finance is my background. I'm going to try and help. So I decided to run, and I ended up winning. So.
Was it? I mean, I have to ask you because I mean this is a big thing. I mean, from a guy who comes from Norwich, Illinois. I mean, it's a big thing because I always wanted to be part of that suburb, and in that sense, like, kind of like you, and of course got feared away because of what I considered politics in that village.
Yeah.
Meaning, not a bad politics, but a good politics. Were you were you nervously scared to do this?
Yeah, you know what? Because you become part of the public, right? So you become a
Right.
target. And like I said, the campaign got a little crazy, and I tried to stay above it all. To me, transparency has always been a big thing. I
Sure.
tell people all the time, look, you might not like what I tell you, but you're going to know exactly what's on my mind, because I'm not smart enough to keep track of everything I'm telling different people. So if I tell everybody the same thing, it's easy to keep track of. So, and that's kind of my campaign. My biggest thing on the signs, that I had was transparency. Just, what you see is what you get. And, that's the way politics should be, even though it never is. But
Right.
politics should be to serve and represent the people within the community. It shouldn't be to lead. I mean, if you're a politician, you should, other than the president of the United States, maybe you shouldn't be a leader. You really should be in the position to serve and represent the people, your constituents and stuff. So I ran basically on that platform, and it resonated with the residents. So
Yeah. Pretty cool. Now, it is a time. I mean, this is a time commitment thing, right? This is not one
Oh,
hour a
absolutely.
month.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, it's you're definitely putting in time. I mean, the hardest part is doing the research, because I'm not a politician, and I think the biggest thing most people don't understand about politics is, it's not like a business where you could decide one day, hey, I'm going to go do this over here, and I'm going to
Right.
raise some money and just go do it. The amount of roadblocks that you have
Sure.
as a municipality to try to, put in to get grants and try to get money, and how long everything takes. It moves at a snail's pace. That's probably the hardest adjustment I had to make, because, I'm like, when I ran a mortgage division, I was like, okay, you know what, this makes sense. Let's figure out a plan. Let's figure out how we're going to pay for it, and let's go do it. And we would start right away. Here you got to wait months and months before you even get it off the ground. So,
Fantastic. I mean, and it's amazing how, like you said, this lady remembered you and she saw the quality you brought in Carol Stream. And, it opens up this door. And I find it great that you still had, gas in the tank to want to
yeah,
do this because, like you said, you're going to be dealing with a lot of stuff. And I'm sure you've already dealt with a lot of stuff since April.
yeah, no, absolutely. It's, we got a big new development coming up in town, and everybody out here would like to keep the area semi-rural. And I keep telling everybody, look, progress is going to happen. You're not going to stop progress. The difference is, do you control it? Do you have a say so in how it, how progress happens and how fast developments are built and how big they are?
Sure.
Or do you just sit back and one day somebody comes in and they have the right contacts in Springfield or in Washington, and they have the right amount of money, and they come in and they put in this huge subdivision that nobody wants, but you don't have any say so because they knew the right people and had the right amount of money to be able to do it. So I tell everybody, look, it's better to have control, kind of stay within your fundamentals of what you want to
Sure.
do as a town, and then control the growth instead of just letting the growth go wild on you. So,
How long are you in this position now? For how long?
well, I went for a 2-year term because obviously, I'm going to be 65, next March. And part of the reason I did it, is, my wife watches our granddaughter 4 or 5 days a week, and I just wanted to stay busy. It's funny, you make all these great plans when you retire. I'm going to go spend the
Yeah.
winters in Arizona. I'm going to travel around the world, go see my family back in Italy. And then all of a sudden grandkids show up, and
Oh, God.
our
Yeah.
daughter's a single mom, so she needs help, so my wife helps her. and
Sure.
and to me, I can't sit around the house by myself, just like we were talking about before. I can't just sit around twiddling my thumbs.
No, you've never been
um
that. You've never had that style. Yeah, to
yeah,
be
yeah, so
exactly. Listen, we're gonna play a game of 5 questions.
okay,
At the end, it's gonna be a 5A and B. That's the one that you really got to be honest with me about. But
okay,
we're gonna do a game of five and see.
okay.
It's kind of a game and a question. So, question one, Frank, because we want our audience to get to know you just a little better. Who's that early mentor, or even give me a couple guys, or even a couple ladies? If it's mom and dad, it's mom and dad, but that really put Frank Binetti on the track that he is.
um Actually, my father-in-law, when it comes to the mortgage business, I think he was a great teacher and mentor for me, from a business,
Sure.
perspective. And my parents, honestly, even though it was really old school, and they weren't really used to, going to school and doing things because they grew
Right.
up during the war and everything else. But the work ethic they instilled in me, and, at the time we were growing up, it was like, man, you know what? My friends don't have to do some of this stuff. Some of the
Yeah.
kids that you met in school that weren't Italian, basically. So you're like, why am I having to do this? Even when I was getting up at 3 in the morning going to Laborio, when I got my paycheck, I handed it to my mom. I didn't even get to keep the money.
Yeah.
So, but you know what? That all stayed with me through life, and
Sure.
and you start to value money, and you start to value what it means to really work
Sure.
hard. So, I would say both of my parents really instilled that in me. And it's everybody has their sports heroes. I don't know if there was really any of them out there that
Yeah.
that influenced me. But I would say my parents and my father-in-law probably had the biggest influence on me
Well, you
as
talked about
far
him a
as,
lot here tonight. And by the
yeah.
way, is your father-in-law still with us?
He's not. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
we
And
lost
of course, I knew
all
your
our
parents
parents.
very well
Yeah, yeah.
because your dad and
So,
my dad talked all the time, and I remember them going to Italy a lot in the 70s and 80s. All right, that second question. What's your favorite movie that you can watch 200 times and not get bored?
uh, you know
You can
what?
give me one or
My,
two.
I would say My Cousin Vinny.
Oh, the
Uh,
best.
oh my! I could watch that movie constantly. I could probably just sit around on a Saturday
The
afternoon
Utes,
and
you know.
just to Utes. Just a classic movie. And you know what? I really enjoyed like Top Gun.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know,
With Cruz.
I don't know what it is, but military movies, back in the John Wayne days and everything else,
Yeah.
I watched all of those growing up, the westerns and the military movies. So Top Gun, just because of how they filmed it, and to me, I could watch over and over again.
Crazy. No,
Just
but
just watching the military scenes, the plane scenes.
good stuff that you brought up. Yeah, especially those top two, and of course, and the military movies are. Yeah, they leave like an impression on you sometimes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All right, you got to be careful with this one,
Uh-oh.
but from your childhood to now, name me your top five pizzerias.
Oh my God. Um, Well, I would tell you, Fellini's, it's not there anymore, but it used to be an Italian couple in Mount Prospect.
Okay,
It was probably the best pizza, thin crust pizza.
thin crust.
Obviously, in
Yeah,
Chicago, we have a lot of different places, but to me, Fellini's, it had such a nice uh, uh, crisp dough. When they cooked it, and the
sure.
ingredients they put on top were top notch. So the one I like today a lot is Salerno's, the traditional Salerno's. Um, the
Very good.
biggest one. That was a very good pizza, and they're not around anymore. But there used to be a place called Trios right on.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so it was Mick Caravetta, which I went to grade school with. He and his cousin opened that one, and they
Right.
used to have a really good pizza. Um, Trying to
You
think
got
what
two
other
more
ones.
here.
Yeah. Um, Tortorice's still makes a good pizza. They went to they kind of franchised Tortorice's a little bit, but they were another one that was in
They
the
were
Mount
another one.
Prospect
Sure,
area.
sure.
Yeah. So they're a good one. And you know what? The one I really like, and because they're a bakery, they don't get a lot of credit for it. D'Amato's Bakery,
Oh yes, yes,
on
yes.
Grand Avenue. They make
Brandon
kind of the
Ogden.
old, yeah. They make the old like Napolitan pizza, a little bit
Napolitano.
thicker,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but it's just so good. And Victor and I grew up together as kids. Our
Yeah.
parents knew each other really well. I don't get into the city as much as I used to, but every time I'm there, I literally want to go buy a sheet of that. I mean, they sell it, by the
Yeah, that
slice,
was
but
that style of how we grew up.
yeah, it's just so good. The taste, and so those are probably
The
my
ones,
favorites. But you know what? I'll eat any pizza anywhere.
Before I get to question five, I got to ask you this because this has been an interesting interview tonight, especially with the mortgages and your political career now and everything else that you do. Um, if Frank Benetti had to do it all over again, you think he's doing it the same way?
That one's a tough question, John. Yeah, I would say yes. I lived a very good life. It's been really good to me. The weird part, and this is really weird. They ask kids all the time. What do you want to be when you grow up? And to me, it was, hey, I want to be a baseball player, of course. But once I started getting into high school, I started selling shoes at Kinney Shoes, and I got really good at that, the sales part of it. And I knew in high school, going into college, I wanted to be a salesman. And everybody thought I was
Wow.
nuts. I'm like, who in their right mind wants to be a salesman? But I just was good at it, and the hustle and the hard work, and And it's not the traditional salesman where, you're kind of, the corny guy who just wants to BS you, to get a sale. It was, just really wanting to help people. And I think if you take that mentality in there is, how can I work hard, learn what I'm doing, and help people achieve their
Sure.
goals, whether it's a mortgage, whether it's buying a pair of shoes, whether, whatever it is that you're selling. I've always wanted to do that. And so, yeah, I would say I would do it all over again because, that was my goal from high school. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be a
Yeah.
lawyer. I mean, it just, to me, I
Well,
had
you have that
fun.
calming effect too to be the good salesman, and I think people listen to you. Like I had to listen to you tonight about what was going on in that
Yeah.
industry because you hear so much hearsay.
Well,
All
and
right, I
it's,
want to tell it.
no,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Frank.
I was going to say my wife probably won't agree with this, but I try to be a good listener. So.
Yeah, okay. No, mine won't either. I know
Yeah.
that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right, I want to tell our audience one thing, and of course, a lot of people know Frank, and I know Frank too. Got a chance to play softball with him in the early '80s too, on the same team. We're on a police league team where he come in as a sub, and I come in as sub. And I got to play against his brother Dino when Dino played for the Roadway Hotel, and we had some hellacious battles when I played for the Hyatt Regency O'Hare. But I want everybody to know that Frank Binetti is a true Chicago Cubs fan. I called him after game 7. He went to Cleveland to watch game 7 of that game. I'll never forget it. And I go, Frank, where are you? He goes, we're here. We're having a blast. For some reason, we were keeping in touch because I think I was doing a trip for you guys. And when I go, God, this guy went all the way to Cleveland. But I got to tell you now I got to put you on the spot. And then there's a question B to this.
Yeah.
The question 5A is this. You have to now name your all-time from when you were a kid to now, your starting 9 and 4 pitchers of the
Oh,
Chicago Cubs that you love and you use as an email.
oh my God, that is such a hard question. Well,
Give me your starting 9 on the field, and I'll give you 4 pitchers. No, your top 4 pitchers. Frank Benetti's the manager.
Okay.
Game 7 of the World Series.
I'm going to take
By the way,
Randy
you're playing the lowly White Sox. No.
well, then I can name any 9 Cubs, and it's a win.
That was a shot.
You know what? I love the '69 Cubs. I'm going to go Huntley, Sano,
Okay.
um, DeJesus at short,
Jesus. Okay.
Sandberg. Even though I love Kessinger,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I'll take Ernie at first.
Okay.
He played at first a little bit later, even though he was a shortstop early.
Yes. Yes. Great first
Uh,
baseman later.
Oh, the outfield's so tough. I got to go Sammy Sosa and right.
Okay.
I'll you know what? I'll take PCA in center right now.
Oh,
Even though,
probably the best center fielder in 40 years.
yeah, yeah. I think I got to go PCA and you can't leave off Billy Williams and left.
Oh, yeah.
So
Frank, I still see him making that catch when Holtzman had the no-hitter and Aaron
yeah,
hit the ball and he caught it in the well.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought for sure you would say Jerome Walton. No.
No.
All right. No.
Pitchers, you got to go.
And now give me your 4 starting pitchers.
For starting pitchers, I was going to go Bruce Sutter because
Okay. I put Suter in. Okay.
look, you got Bruce Sutter, Lee Smith in the bullpen, Fergie Jenkins, Rick Russell, Sutcliffe,
Sutcliffe.
was good,
Good.
and who's the other one now? Boy, I'm drawing a blank. Kerry Wood.
Kerry Wood. Oh God, who could
Before he
forget
got
Wood?
hurt,
If
so.
he didn't damage that arm, could you imagine what he could have been?
Yeah, no, I'd probably go with, I would take that. Russell was never a big power pitcher. Man, that guy knew how to pitch. He knew how to
Yes.
change speeds and
I
everything
could
else.
still hear, and his brother wasn't that bad. Paul out of the
No,
bullpen.
Paul wasn't bad either. But you know
Yeah.
what? And if you read back, and I know I listened to the thing you did on the '69 Cubs and the amount
Oh,
of
did you? I
innings.
was going to ask you.
Yeah, I did. And you look at a pitcher like Ferguson Jenkins. Oh, you know what? Holtzman. I can't leave out
Oh
Holtzman.
yeah.
So, and again, you know what? This wasn't fair because you didn't prep me on any of these questions.
No, none of these questions. That's why our audience do. So this look good. All right.
Yeah.
Here's the biggest question. I have my answer. I'm going to say it first. Okay. So
Okay.
I'm going to say the answer that I think, because how you were, and I mean this. My answer is Frank Binetti. But the last question of the night is this: who was the better softball player, Frank or Dino?
Here, I'll give you a politically correct answer. Dino was a better hitter. I was a better fielder. I was always the shortstop. So
Yes,
I was
good
the better
hands.
fielder. I think Dino was the better hitter, though. I'll give him those kudos.
I always played Dino because I was a left fielder, pull to left.
Oh
But
yeah,
he
no,
would
no,
hit
no.
into the next parking lot.
Yeah. He'd hit for power like crazy. So no, I was a decent hitter,
You
but
guys were
I was
tremendous ball players, both of
yeah, I
you.
was a much better fielder. So you know what?
You
Having
think
big
Dino
hands
will? You had great hands, and you were lanky, and you could move. You
yeah.
covered a lot of ground at short. Do you think Dino will watch this?
You know what? I'll send it to him. Absolutely. I think he will.
Okay, I haven't seen him in a while. Once in a while, we hit each other on Facebook.
Yeah, well, you know what?
Um,
We're both big pickleball players now. As you get older, you kind of, you tone
yeah, we
down
slow
what
it
you
down
do.
for sure.
So
I
we
got to
play a lot
read
of
you
pickleball.
something, and then I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
That caught my eye the other day about you. And this is what I got to say about you, and I really appreciate you coming on this tonight, a conversation with John Canetta. Your impact and your vision. Frank is widely recognized for his ability to build high-performance teams, drive sales, and streamline operations through what we call strong leadership. Frank, keep doing what you're doing, because that right there describes Frank Binetti.
John, thank you. Thank you for trusting me, with your and your family's, business.
Oh, you've been great.
And thanks for taking care of us in our travel. Venus
Yeah,
Travel
thank you.
has
And
always
you've
been
recommended so
first
many
class.
people to me. It's been unbelievable.
Yeah. So, but anyway, thank you for
All
this.
right.
I didn't know what to expect. I'm like,
I hope you liked it. We're going to get it out here in a couple days, Frank, on YouTube and on Spotify. I'll probably have it out to you by probably Wednesday
Okay.
for everyone to see. And this will be a very, I like what people are going to think about this. You really hit the spot on the mortgage stuff. Unbelievable.
Oh, well, thanks for your time, John. Thanks for thinking of me.
You got it. Everyone, have a great evening, and thank you.
Bye-bye.